Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my honourable colleagues for that rousing applause. And I'd also like to inform you, Mr. Speaker, that I will be sharing my time with the member for Burnaby Douglas. So, Mr. Speaker, today I rise once again to speak about the Investment Canada Act, and once again I'm disappointed that I have to rise and speak to the problems that has still not been addressed. So why am I so disappointed, Mr. Speaker? 2 years ago, this House unanimously supported an NDP motion calling to improve the Investment Canada Act to make the net benefit test more transparent, to give communities affected by foreign takeovers the chance to have their voices heard. I only know that too well, Mr. Speaker, because many of the comments that we've heard today from both sides of the House relate to Thibeault with the takeover of Inco and Xstrata with the takeover of Falconbridge happened in my riding. And none of those voices were heard, Mr. Speaker. I'm also disappointed because if the government had fulfilled its commitment, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't be debating this issue again. But instead, the Conservatives ignored the legitimate concerns of Canadians. Last Friday's announcement by the Prime Minister makes it all too clear, Mr. Speaker. The Investment Canada Act needs to be fixed. So although I'm disappointed that we again have to debate this issue, I am a proud member of this party, the only party that is putting Canadians' interests first, especially on this issue, Mr. Speaker. So Friday's announcement, Mr. Speaker, I feel like I'm quoting a Katy Perry song, Last Friday Night. Every time the Conservatives make an announcement relating to the Investment Canada Act, it happens on Friday night. The song's talking about doing shots on tabletops. I don't know what they're doing, Mr. Speaker, but they're making decisions that are affecting Canadians, and it's not doing any of them any justice, Mr. Speaker. Inconsistent messaging coming from the Conservatives. Nexon and Progress takeovers, both done using existing rules, and they've all said these existing rules are broken. In the announcement, the Prime Minister admitted that the old rules didn't work and that moving forward takeovers by state-owned enterprises are unlikely to be approved. If the old rules don't work, Mr. Speaker, why are we approving the sell-off of assets under them? There's been 2 years since the motion to adopt to rewrite them, and they've done nothing, Mr. Speaker. The new rules were written in secret by the PMO and still fail Canadians. No clarification of the net benefit test, Mr. Speaker. No public consultations with impacted Canadians. No mandatory disclosure of guarantees. Nothing to improve reciprocity of Canadian investors abroad. No consideration of the strategic importance of an asset. And rules still say that the SOEs can buy Canadian assets in exceptional circumstances. What does exceptional circumstances mean, Mr. Speaker? They need that clarified. We have a broken ICA review process system and then a broken promise to fix it. Instead, what we have here, Mr. Speaker, on a Friday night, they just merely tinkered with the process that everybody agrees is broken. So in 2010, the Conservative government, as I mentioned, unanimously supported our motion calling for clearer net benefit test and a more transparent investment review process, including mandatory public hearings with affected communities, public disclosure of all conditions attached to approval of a takeover, along with the enforceable penalties for non-compliance, clarifying that the goal of the Act is to encourage foreign investment that brings new capital and technology and creates jobs rather than simply seeking control of strategic Canadian resources. Both the Prime Minister and then Industry Minister back in the early 2000s promised 2 years ago to clarify the meaning of net benefit in the Act. Mr. Speaker, I can speak specifically about why we need some clear guidelines when it comes to the Investment Canada Act. So as I mentioned at the start of my speech, back in 2006, Inco and Falconbridge both taken over by Thibeault and Xstrata. When Inco was taken over by Xstrata, there was vague promises of no job losses. There was no way to hold them to account after this takeover was completed. So for a year, while a strike raged in my community, and we on this side of the House stood in this House asking the government to help us clarify what is in the Act, to help us understand why so many jobs were lost in our community when we had guarantees that there would be no job losses for the first 3 years. All of these job losses happened within that time frame, but the government did nothing. The government stood there and said, we can't tell you this information, it's confidential. And while I respect that it's confidential, it shouldn't be that way, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we've been calling for changes to the Investment Canada Act to make it more transparent. So the communities that are affected by takeovers have the opportunity to hear what these promises are going to be, to hear what the guarantees are going to be, so we can discuss it, so we can be prepared. And if you're looking at what we're hearing from the other side, is name one thing that we support. SR Steel in Sault Ste. Marie has done a good job of being a foreign company that is investing in its community, right? So we are talking about what's going on with the Investment Canada Act that is broken and that they're refusing to fix, Mr. Speaker. Now we also have the FIPA, the Canada-China Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement. Once this comes into effect, Mr. Speaker, it will make the Prime Minister's comments on SOEs taking over Canadian assets moot. Mr. Speaker, FIPA says that once a Chinese company is established in Canada, it must receive national treatment, meaning it's to be treated the same way that the government treats Canadian companies. This means that the CNOOC-Nexen deal will be treated as a domestic firm for further acquisitions. Even limiting protections of the Investment Canada Act will now be lost. So all of this is for moot, Mr. Speaker. If we're allowing the FIPA to move forward, then who's to say that now this all is going to happen? So if the government tries to block CNOOC from further acquisitions, the government could face lawsuits in the millions or billions filed in secret international tribunals, so Canadians will never know the real costs. Mr. Speaker, not only does FIPA sell out Canadians, it does so without any reciprocal benefits for Canadian companies who wanted to purchase Canadian or Chinese assets. Grandfathers in China's opaque and uncatalogued regulatory rules go into this treaty, and the Prime Minister's commitment to ensuring access to China for Canadian investors now rings hollow, Mr. Speaker. How much time do I have left, Mr. Speaker? 2 minutes? I'm sure my members from the other side don't like hearing the truth, Mr. Speaker, but I'll continue saying it for another 2 more minutes. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Speaker, it's not just the NDP that was calling for a lot of these changes, Mr. Speaker, to a broken act that needs fixing. We've all talked about the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. We all share the NDP concerns that the rules leave Canadians in the dark, Mr. Speaker. Even foreign investors don't understand how the Conservatives are making their decisions. I'm quoting, "We were told of the framework only after submission, and we were quite surprised. We wish we knew what the new framework will be. At this point, the whole industry has no clue." That was on November 29th by the Chief Executive of Petronas, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in summation, the system is a mess. Canadians are in the dark. Foreign investors are in the dark. As the system stands, all the power for deciding if a foreign takeover is approved or not lies in the hands of the Prime Minister. That is not how the system should work in a parliamentary democracy, Mr. Speaker. There should be clear rules that everyone can understand, with benchmarks that we can properly judge every potential acquisition. The NDP, Mr. Speaker, can be trusted to put such a system in place. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.